Welcome to the Mighty.rip podcast, hosted by Dave DeBa. As always, the Mighty.rip podcast is coming to you live from the super plush Mighty.rip broadcast studios in the heart of Silicon Valley. Now, to the host that can't stop ripping on players, coaches, and bad front office management, Dave DeBa.
Coming up on the Mighty.rip pod, I will tell you why if you're a Dak Prescott fan, you absolutely need to Aaron Rodgers relax. Plus a little bit of insight into what the National Basketball Association season might look like if it concludes in a bubble. All of that, and as always, trust me, a whole lot more coming up on the Mighty.rip pod today. But we begin with the Dallas Cowboy fans. That's right, Cowboy Nation. That is completely off its rocker as last week Andy Dalton was signed to a $3 million a year contract to be the Cowboys' backup quarterback. I want to reemphasize, to be the Cowboys' backup quarterback. Andy Dalton, at this stage of his career, is not a threat to Dak Prescott in any possible way. The only way Andy Dalton is a threat to Dak Prescott is if Dak, for some reason, goes down with an injury and Andy Dalton comes in and relives his greatest season ever. So you might be asking yourself, DeBa, what is Andy Dalton's greatest season ever? And the answer to that question is 4,200 yards passing, 18 touchdowns against 8 interceptions. That right there, Andy Dalton's greatest season ever, and it took place in 2016. We are moving into 2020, as you all know, and Andy Dalton has been a shell of himself for the last 3 years in Cincinnati. And can you blame him? I mean, like, what kind of quarterback could be successful in Cincinnati out of the gate? I think a player like Lamar Jackson and a player like Tua could be successful in Cincinnati out of the gate, which is why I didn't understand why the Cincinnati Bengals decided to relive their inner Cleveland Browns badness by going ahead and picking Joe Burrow as their starting quarterback. I just had to get that in. Anyways, so back to Dak Prescott. Look, Dak Prescott is a good quarterback. Dak Prescott is coming off his best season ever in the National Football League. Dak Prescott in 2019 threw for just under 5,000 yards. Look, I know we're living in this new era of extended Madden football where everybody scores every time they touch the ball. But still, Dak Prescott had 30 touchdowns against 11 interceptions. Clearly, Dak Prescott is at the top of his game, which is exactly why the Dallas Cowboys need to simply pay Dak already. Look, I can't even believe that we're still having this Dak Prescott contract discussion. I guess maybe because we're sitting here in the social distancing era and we're all at home. Well, supposedly we're all at home. Look, I took a drive into San Francisco over the weekend with my wife, and we went down to the Marina District, and it was busier than it normally is. And I'd say about a quarter of the people were wearing masks to begin with. And so I think the era of social distancing, as important as it is, a lot of people are not really doing what they should be doing. I will say this, we didn't get out of the car. We were just curious to see what was going on. So back to Dak. Look, he's had a great year. I think he's a solid quarterback, a solid second-tier quarterback in the National Football League. He certainly is a good enough quarterback to be the star, to wear the star of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Jerry Jones and the Jones brothers excuse me, and the Joneses will eventually sign Dak Prescott to a contract. And it's just a question of whether or not it's going to be a 3, 4, or 5-year deal. That being said, Dak is going to get paid. Dak, for a short period of time, will most likely be the highest paid quarterback in the history of the National Football League. And as we all know, these contracts only stay at that level until the next guy gets paid. So why was there all of this silliness about Andy Dalton being a threat to Dak Prescott? And basically what happened is people started looking at Tom Brady and they said, who is Tom Brady's backup? People started looking at Drew Brees and they said, well, like when Drew Brees was great with the New Orleans Saints, earlier in his career, who was Drew Brees' backup? When you look at Peyton Manning as an Indianapolis Colt, who was his backup? And of course, the answer to all three of those questions is nobody that you would recognize. They were all young quarterbacks who were developmental, which is the best way to describe who those backups were. Now, look, the Dallas Cowboys said, hey, look, we're going to bring in a veteran backup quarterback to be there in case something happens to Dak. We believe we have all of the tools that it's going to take to actually make a run at the Super Bowl this year. We're going to cover ourselves by bringing in a former starter who had a couple decent seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals, and we're going to pay him as a backup quarterback in the National Football League. There is absolutely nothing there that should indicate in any way to anybody that Dak Prescott is going to somehow lose out to Andy Dalton in camp. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so moving on to one more story I wanted to make sure we covered on today's Mighty.rip pod. And that is taking you inside the National Basketball Association bubble. I wrote a blog about this the other day, and it is this interesting concept about taking all 30 teams in the National Basketball Association and basically dropping them off in a city. Sort of like what happens in Las Vegas with the Las Vegas Summer League, where basically all 30 teams are there to compete in a tournament against each other. Now, of course, that's Summer League. That's not regular season or playoff basketball. And there certainly is the opposite of what social distancing needs to be in Las Vegas during the Summer League. The objective is to not social distance when you go to Vegas, which is why, even in this era that we're living in now, I think that Bob Iger, the chairman of the Disney Corporation, has the best pitch available, which is basically taking all 30 National Basketball Association teams and dropping them in to Walt Disney World. Look, they've got all the restaurants. They've got all the hotels. They have all of those Disney characters for the players' families for them to have some fun with. Plus, they've got the pixie dust. They've got the ESPN Wide World of Sports facilities, which come fully baked with lots of basketball courts, lots of indoor facilities, and the ability to instantly, if you will, out of the box, knock out nationally televised broadcasts from their arenas there. The Walt Disney World area is by far the ultimate and the best choice if the National Basketball Association is going to indeed move itself into a bubble. Look, earlier in the week, the KBO, the Korea Baseball Organization, went ahead and got back to playing baseball. Now, they're doing this at a couple different stadiums, and they're doing this with no fans in the stands. The PGA Tour is going to come out with their tour in June with no fans on the fairways. NASCAR is going to have its first NASCAR race coming up in 2 weeks with no fans in the stands. Look, as much as I've enjoyed some of the iRacing, I can't wait to actually see some real wrecks. That being said, the National Basketball Association, unlike some of those other sports, has a real opportunity to actually do something unique and sort of cool that are, quite frankly, not probable for some of those other teams, some of those other sports leagues. So I think this whole idea of the National Basketball Association not canceling their season makes a lot of sense. Not allowing the teams to fly from city to city makes a lot of sense. And then somehow having a short end to their season, maybe another 5 to 10 games of their regular season so all 30 teams can be involved. And then we move into the playoffs. And depending on the social conditions in the country at that point, the decision to actually hold the playoffs at Walt Disney World would certainly be a viable option for the National Basketball Association. Okay. So, hey, thanks so much for tuning in to the Big Mighty Rip pod. We do have our Mighty.rip website. We've got merch on there now. You can get the big Get Mighty hat if you click on the merch channel. It's shameless plug time, I'm telling you, North America. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. We're up to 1 or 2 shows a week. Really appreciate all of the support at Mighty.rip. For the Mighty Rip, I am Dave DeBaugh, reminding you that sometimes players, coaches, and front office folks make horrifically bad decisions, Bill O'Brien. And it's our jobs as fans to set them straight.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mighty Rip podcast. Make sure to check out Mighty.rip, where we are covering the latest from the world of sports. This month, we have in-depth coverage of the National Football League draft, Michael Jordan's return to TV, and the NBA's latest attempts to produce virtual sports.